All right. Hey, everybody. Dan Fitzpatrick here, stockmarketmentor.com. Hopefully, you had a chance to catch me this morning on IBD Live. It's always fun to do that with the gang. They're all great traders, awesome people, and it's fun to be a part of it. So, and if you didn't catch it, you can go over to IBD and watch the recording. We did a lot of stocks. By the way, I just featured a lot of them in the strategy session that we're just sending out to our premium members. So you can check that out. Now, I want to look at Palomar. This is why. For a few different reasons. First, the stock's working really, really well right now. I'll just kind of cut right to the chase. This isn't really the time to buy the stock. You could say, oh, it's moving nice. I want to own the stock. Yeah, I get that. But the only reason you would be buying the stock is if you thought that the trading channel wasn't here, it was actually like here. In other words, you're buying the stock here and you figure it's never going to come back down. So again, instead of the prevailing trading channel being like here, or now as I see it, even down here, you're saying like, okay, well, no, I'm going to buy the stock. Well, why? It's right up at the top of the channel. You don't want to be doing that. And so the only reason that would trump what I just said is if you looking at the bottom of the channel is not being down here or even being here, instead being right there. And that's not the way this trades. So I want to be long this stock. I don't own any, but hopefully next week I will be able to reverse that. But I want to own some of the stock, but buying it after this kind of move is really not where you want to be. At one point here, I think this was Monday, the very low down here. And then look at Friday where this thing closed. So this thing has gone up, 17%? Something like that, almost 20% in a week. You don't want to be buying the stock here. You want to be watching it. But look at the weekly chart and I'll show you why you want to be buying the stock. Okay? Let's kind of little more perspective here. This is still kind of in the IPO realm here. An IPO, the way you really want to look at it is it's got to go back less than 5 years because the first 5 years of a company tends to be the most growth in the company. So you can't really be that dogmatic about it. This has been in existence for 6 years, but look at what's happened here. Like this stock, this is the longest damn cup and handle I've ever seen. Actually, I have seen longer ones. But so this is a stock that's had one big nasty bull pattern, but now it's finally broken out above 110. So it's gone up a lot already, about 35%. But I don't even want to think about doing a measured move on something like this. And that's where you would take the difference between the top and the bottom, which would be, say, from right here down to there, and that's a 60% move. It's 70 points. And so then you say, all right, well, what's 60 to the upside? Okay, that's about here up to 175, we'll say. So if I'm looking at this stock right now and I just want to do a simple measured move, my target on this would be, I'll just leave this here, it would be 175. That's where the target is for this. So bottom line is, I'd love to buy this stock right now. I just need to see it fall back to closer like to this 40-week or 10-week or 50-day moving average down here. And then I'm going to look for 175 bucks on this. So anyway, that's all I got for you guys. Watch for some marketing next week. I'm going to be trading options at Option Market Mentor along with Sam and Andy, but I'm going to be taking a pretty active place in that. And so check that out. I'll let you know. And we'll also be making an announcement about a webinar that I'm going to be teaching on options. So definitely check that out because if you don't, you're going to miss it. Okay, guys, so that's all I got for you. Hope you had a good week or you had a good week. Definitely hope you survived this really, really nasty week. Next week's not going to be so volatile. I can promise you that. And we'll go make some money.